This is Robert Martellacci of the Mindshare Learning Report, Canada's Learning and Technology e-magazine. And here we are live at the ICD World Conference in Costa Rica, exploring the future of open and online learning. I'm honored to have a Mindshare Learning moment with this morning's keynote, Dr. John O'Brien, who is the President and CEO of EDUCAUSE. Thank you for joining me this afternoon, John.
Thank you. Well, it's great to be here. Anytime we can listen and learn from international perspectives is a great time for me.
Fantastic. We're just on a break now. We're taking an opportunity to give a perspective on, first of all, tell us a little bit about EDUCAUSE for those viewers who might not be aware of.
Yeah, EDUCAUSE is a nonprofit organization, fairly international. We have about 250 international colleges and universities at our big annual conference just finished in October in Chicago. We had probably 500 attendees from 26 different countries. So international is a big part of EDUCAUSE.
We've got some 2,300 institutions
we have
in the U.S.
about 1,500 in colleges and universities in the U.S. So we're an association. Basically, if you work in higher ed and you have the word technology in your title or job description, you're our community, anybody who's at that intersection. So we serve this community with research in the field. We have events like a few different conferences, one on cybersecurity. We're doing a generative AI innovation summit in February. So we do events, and we also have a number of institutes for professional development related to technology.
Thank you for that. And I do want to preface and apologize that it is rainy season. So you might hear thunderstorms in the background. That's what you're
hearing. That's great, because they're all jealous that we're in Costa Rica. So it's rainy and cloudy.
It's a tough assignment. We did have a little sun, I'm not going to lie, this morning. But at any rate, you shared this morning the top 10 trends in education. Something that stood out in my mind was the state of well-being of students and students being at the center. That's a tremendous pivot from when I started as a university administrator some 25 plus years ago at York University. I'm so heartened by that shift that's happened. It's taken longer than it should, but talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, it's been a sea change, so I know exactly what you're saying, because when I was a newly minted English PhD teaching for the first time, I firmly believed, and maybe you remember the phrase, students have a right to fail. Now, what a deeply offensive way to think about teaching and learning enterprise. But at the time, we really believed that as professionals, our job was to do our job, and students' job was to do their job. And if we didn't meet in the center, well, okay, that's all right. Well, now we've taken a different perspective, and we know that student success is at the heart and soul of what we do. And it's been in the top 10 issues for a while, really since 2022. We said that if student success has to be at the center of institutional work, but now it's taken on a sense of urgency that the pandemic has taught us.
Absolutely, and some of the data you shared was quite striking. Some 40% of students are anxious and dealing
with depression or anxiety. And what's important about that data I showed was that it's not just because of the pandemic. Those are trends. That's a graph from 2015 to now that just is a very steep incline to students dealing with significant stress.
You did share there are tools out there that are available.
And it's interesting. And I had a short version of a very long presentation. And had I had more time, I would have pointed out that technology can also be the problem. We know that, the Surgeon General in the U.S. just warned parents about the dangers of social media for teenagers. So technology isn't the solution to every problem.
And moderation.
And what I talked about was some of the important ways that technology can help care for students in a different and more effective way, how technology can help address mental health and wellness challenges. And I mentioned Navi, the mental health focused chatbot from the University of Toronto, is one example of how
Canadian innovation. And that is available free.
Well, I think it's a tool that they use at the university for their students. But, we've known for many years now that chatbots are effective for academic retention and success. But what other ways can chatbots help? Students have mental health crises at 1 a.m. They don't schedule their mental health crises during business hours when staff are available. They have them at their own bidding. And so to have a chatbot, to have 24/7 resources available for students, those are the ways that technology can help. And it's not technology taking jobs from other people. It's the number one question that the chatbot at University of Toronto gets from students is, how can I talk to a person? Well, a chatbot can say, well, the counseling
Right.
office is open
Amazing.
at 9 to 10 on Tuesdays. And so we'll see you there.
Well, it's a good segue to something that's very top of mind here at the conference uh, in Costa Rica and back in Canada, no doubt in your backyard. The whole generative AI challenge and transformation that's happening. It's not something that's coming. It's here now.
But it's funny because the top 10 issues,
Didn't
um,
include it.
didn't include it. It got an honorable mention, but that's not because it doesn't have the potential to change higher ed for good or bad or both. It's just because we're in the first blink of an eye. I mean, it's true that this technology has grown faster than any technology ever, but it's also true that we're just at the first stages. We don't fully understand how it's going to be used, misused. So really, one of my points in the brief time I had to talk about it was, let's not succumb to hype on this. Of all things, let's take a pause and take a pause for ethics, for thinking about the data privacy related to generative AI. And this is a story that's changing almost on a weekly basis. And we don't even have, Canada's doing some things with regulation.
Right.
The Biden administration just did some things.
That's
and
right.
Europe, of course, is always. But we can just slow down and try to do the work we need to do now with exploring it, playing with it, understanding as we are now what are the ramifications for teaching and so forth. But this is a long story that we're in the very first pages of.
Absolutely. It's all about using the right tool at the right time as we're leveraging a wide angle lens camera that you don't see. We have a snowball microphone here and our computer to enable this conversation. So really, it's what's in your toolbox. Use it at the right time. And it's no different than what tools are going to be available from an AI perspective. I'm doing some research around the future platform that we want to leverage. And I asked ChatGPT on recommendations of what platforms. And I hadn't thought about Slack as a tool to continue the conversation. We just hosted a conference up in Ottawa on the future of learning technology from a K to 12 higher ed perspective on sustainable learning environments. Talk to me about sustainability, access to technology. We're struggling with consistent bandwidth here. I had to tether. We're not out of the woods yet when it comes to that.
Well, that's one of the things that we learned. I mean, of course, COVID has been a great teacher, the pandemic, and one of the things we learned, it used to be we thought that all we had to do was wire our campuses and then we're good, like we've succeeded. Well, the pandemic taught us that students are the last mile, and you can have the campuses wired to the hilt, but if students can't get to campus, So
Right.
so we did all kinds of creative things, but even so after
So that equity piece.
yeah, but
Digital
even
equity.
after that, we
Right.
we just did a student study, and one of the data points I remember is I think it was 31% of students. I may remember wrong, but it was something around that. 31% of students had a technology failure at some important point, like when they were uploading an essay or when they were completing an exam.
Exam.
The broadband is and it depends on the location, it depends on the services, and so we have a lot. It's funny. I was hired in 2015, and at that time we kind of stopped talking about digital divide, didn't we? I mean, in the early
Right.
2000s we talked about it all the time, and then I think we maybe thought we had solved it, but the pandemic taught us that we have not at all, and there's work to be done.
So what keeps you up at night? What are one of the top 10 trends that you highlighted that we haven't touched on that really?
Well, I think I don't know if it keeps me up at night because it's actually somewhat positive, but
Oh, good.
every year Susan Graycheck, who's the brain at EDUCAUSE behind the top 10, she always finds some way to bring all these disparate things together. Like cybersecurity continues to be number
Absolutely.
one. But there's other things in there, and this year she brought them all together, and she and the team that she uses, the group that helps her with it. Around the idea of institutional resilience. So I think what keeps me up at night is because we've matured. It's not about using this technology or that technology or this technology or solving this problem or this problem. It's how do we, whack-a-mole, do we have that in Canada? Oh, the game where you try a thing pops up and you try to hit
sure,
it.
yeah,
So
we do.
if we continue to be reactive, we're not being strategic. But if we step back and say, how can we as institutions become stronger? And stronger doesn't mean your ability to withstand change. It means the ability to adapt to challenges that emerge. And so we've really turned our focus in this year's top 10 issues, and you can download it at Google EDUCAUSE top 10, and to really focus on all the top 10 viewed through the lens of resilience. So financial resilience, operational resilience, and mission resilience, and the role of technology in building resilience.
And I'd add to that student resilience.
Well, that's the mission. Right? Resilience is all about focusing on students.
And that's the student at the center.
Yes. Yep.
So learning environments was one of the things we talked about. We visited Ottawa U, Faculty of Education. State-of-the-art learning environments. Learning environments are made up of online, in-person, blended. I did my master's in EdTech, you should be aware, at Pepperdine, learning technology.
I consider that a threat.
A tough assignment, but that was in my mid-40s. My wife thought I was going through a midlife crisis. I was going to go become a surfer in Malibu.
You could do worse.
But it was very inspirational for me and transformative to really have a deep grounding in learning environments, especially online and blended. So talk to me a little bit about the whole evolution of the ecosystem and where you're driving the bus.
Do you remember NGDLE?
Yes.
So that NGDLE was research out of EDUCAUSE, led by two people who have since happily retired, or retired happily, I should say. But NGDLE is Next Generation Digital Learning Environments. I always called it an acronym, only a mother could love it. But the thing is, if you Google it, you'll find it. And NGDLE was this concept of interoperability, that it's no longer going to be one solution that for the digital environment. And that has turned out to be completely true. But I think now what really gets interesting is, how is that environment changing? I believe that the future of education technology is not one solution. I also think that this idea of institutional resilience is really that the technologies will come and go.
Right.
And what's important is, do you have an institution that is prepared to use technology effectively, and maybe use a different technology in a year or two? And that's a different thing. That requires different mindset. It requires different leadership. It requires, and it's also strategic. It's truly strategic. Otherwise, technology is reactive and whack-a-mole. I think we can do better. And
fascinating. So I'm going to ask you a question around, you alluded to AR, VR, and then there's mixed reality, was one of the top 10 I thought. Talk to me about where that sits with you and student engagement.
Relative to that?
Well, relative to the whole experience, because I play on the faculty hockey team at York University, and the professors are challenged to get the attention of students, to get them coming to class. And they don't want them lecturing too long, and because it could be long and boring. And
that's a tricky one, and probably nobody wants a guy who was last teaching in 2013 to be.
So not everyone's embracing the new.
But I think that and maybe a different organization should come up with academic resilience. What does that mean? Because I think any good teacher, and I've been around good teachers and I've benefited from them my whole life, the best teachers are always figuring out what's next.
Right.
Because they know that great expression, what got you here won't get you there, that the things that used to engage students in 1990 may no longer be as effective. And so, I think, of course, the answer is going to have the word technology in it these days if you want to engage students. So, like, if I was teaching English, teaching writing these days, I would be using ChatGPT. I would make my students cheat. I would make them write an essay that I assigned them with ChatGPT, and then critique it, and then find out what does ChatGPT do well, and write and do some writing about what ChatGPT does well and what doesn't it do well, and that would be learning with ChatGPT.
Very cool. The notion of the flipped classroom and challenge-based learning, and putting having the students take more ownership of the learning.
And that was cool 10, 15 years ago when we first started talking about it. And it'll just be so exciting when that becomes normalized. And that, of course, you do that in your classroom because you're the teacher.
So one of the images you had was well, we have a lot of geese in Canada that are flying south now. And then there was a swarm. You showed one of, a perfect
Yeah.
flock, and then
a-
there's a swarm. So talk
Yeah.
to me about that
Well,
analogy.
it's an analogy that I love, partially just because the image is so beautiful. The image is of, I think they're swallows, but it's these birds that
Okay.
every once in a while you look out on if you're driving in a rural area, look out on
Right.
over the cornfield, and you'll see these birds swarming
around.
And so I use that as we thought the future was going to be, a line of V's with geese going in a predictable direction.
Canada geese.
Canada, of course.
Yeah,
I forgot
of
myself.
course.
Yes, but really the future with technologies is more of this, and it's actually the word is murmuration. There you go.
Murmuration.
That was free of charge.
New word of the day for
you
me.
You heard it here first.
Yes.
But that and as a metaphor, it's a beautiful one because there is leadership within that. Yes, you're moving directions, you're changing, you're flexible, you're adaptive, but there's also movement. And my favorite quote that I mentioned this morning was Janet Napolitano, from the president of the University of California, who one of these years that there were something like 3 books that all came out that said, higher ed is doomed, we're doomed, we don't do anything well. And she said, her point was, higher education is not in crisis, it's in motion, and it always has been. And I just love that idea that when we do good work, we're moving, we're agile.
What a great way to end this podcast. And I'll add to that, it's not always a direct path.
Exactly.
I started off as a sport administrator, an SID at a university, and now I'm immersed in EdTech.
And this may not be the last turn for you. You never know, right?
Well, you just don't know.
Hockey career.
I could very well become a surfer in Costa Rica.
Your wife will be right at the end.
Right.
Yeah.
With that, John, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Any final thoughts to share?
No, I'm just going to recklessly share my email address, jobrien@educause.edu. I'd love to hear from you. We're always keen to figure out what we're doing well and what we can do better, and no better way to do that than an email.
With that, thank you so much again. That was John O'Brien, the CEO and president of EDUCAUSE. My name is Robert Ridlacci, the Mindshare Learning Corps. Be sure to check out www.mindshare.learning to get your latest issue. And until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and keep the learning curve steep.